Hey, welcome to Ethics TV. This is episode 40. And I just wanted to record this little intro because there's a couple of words that some people might be shocked by. And so I wanted to do a little trigger warning. I think it's completely contextually relevant. And also, I wanted to say thank you for Mark to join this episode because I found it extremely enjoyable and insightful too. So, sit back, enjoy this. It's a bit of a long one for Ethics TV and it's worth every second in my view. And I apologise for the quality as well because Zoom sometimes is a bit sketchy with quality recordings. This intro is recorded on an iPhone, as you'll notice the difference in quality is outstanding, so there's something in that. But anyway, I hope you enjoy the episode. And I started by asking Mark, what's happening in your life? What's keeping you busy? And we went from there. Over to you.
Well, I got to tell you, since acting is the acting community is in a very strange place right now. The fee structure, the job structure has changed so much since the strike and since COVID that it doesn't quite know what it's doing right now. So it's paralyzed. So I have chosen to continue working with friends, which I do. I do independently produced television shows and movies. I'm writing my own stuff. I also teach people on the side. My wife has a school in Paris, by the way, an acting school in Paris. Most of the time, I'm able to get there in the fall and in the spring to help her teach. And then I'm also preoccupied with podcasts, which I do every day with my friend Michael Leibowitz, who's the vice chair of the American Capitalist Party. I am the chairman of the American Capitalist Party. That has been taking up quite a bit of my time as well, since I've had to rewrite the entire platform almost single-handedly and come up with position papers on foreign affairs and domestic affairs and how we think, what do we think about taxation, yada yada yada. So my time writing has been spent doing stuff like that, and that fills me with a degree of purpose. Oh, and to just blow off steam, I do jujitsu 5 days a week, and I also do interval training as well to heal myself after all my jujitsu
Wow.
training.
Well, so we should unpack each part of that in pieces, including the martial arts side, which I have a strong resonance to as well. For anyone who's new to your name, which I doubt, because I think there isn't anyone who hasn't seen Supernatural, but there is other things you've done in your life, and anyone who is new to you can read the bio, which I've included below this content. Um, do, from your journey to where you've got to now. So if we kind of not end with the capitalist party side, but what led you toward that, or should we start there and work backwards? Because I think people would need to know what's happening that you and your vice chair are doing with that, especially at the time of recording in the middle of June, middle to end of June 2025. Anyone who's watching this in the future will look back and go, "That was a hairy time." So,
Oh, indeed.
which diving board shall we take into this?
I don't mind going from the beginning. I don't mind going from the beginning because, a lot of great things have happened to me by chance, or at least it seems like it's by chance. And it just so happened that I joined a theater company when I started acting that was probably one of the best theater companies on the West Coast. They taught acting, the Meisner technique, amazingly. But the head of the school was anti-Hollywood. And so that meant he bent in sort of a conservative direction. Now, as a Democrat coming out of high school, as a registered Democrat and environmentalist, this was a tad disturbing to me and caused a great deal of cognitive dissonance. But being also an aspiring artist, my mind was open to the things he was saying, and so I exposed myself to a lot of the literature that he would talk about in class. Most other people did not. They were just simply disturbed and didn't like him talking about political or social issues. I thought it was relevant as an actor because they're about values, and value. An actor is a passionate valuer, so I wanted to see what the other side thought. Then there was a guy who showed up in class, and his name was Alexander. I'll give his full name because he'll appreciate this. Alexander Bahar. And he and I would go off and rehearse as young bohemian actors would until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd wind up at a place called Gorky's Cafe, which no longer exists, but it was open 24 hours. You could go there. We would go there and read plays and talk about everything under the sun. And I would have these radical debates with this guy about everything from environmentalism to politics Of course, I was on the hard left of everything, and he was an objectivist, which is something I didn't know about. But he would beat me in every argument. In other words, I don't know if you could call it beating. I just couldn't get around the logic of what he was saying. And I thought, well, you know what? The real problem here is my inability to articulate my point of view. So let's do this, pal. I'm going to do a book exchange with you. I'm going to exchange 5 books with you. You give me your top books, and I think you're going to see my point of view. I thought I was actually going to win this argument. I gave him 5 books like The Road Less Traveled and Illusions by Richard Bach, and I think Dan Millman's Way of the Peaceful Warrior. Like, I went in that direction. He gave me The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. I don't know that any of my books had an effect on him. I know they're valuable books. They're good books in their own way, but The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged literally changed my life, and it threw me into a tailspin. Like, I questioned all of my values at that point, and it began to change the way I worked, the way I approached work, and it became a trouble spot for me for the next decade or so as I proceeded to read everything Rand ever wrote, everything Nathaniel Branden, her former partner, ever wrote, and that he was the founder of the Nathaniel Branden Institute for people who don't know that. And even though they had a break later on in a funky relationship, it was he that advanced the idea of objectivism as a formal philosophy, not just Rand. Rand thought her philosophy was in the novels, and that she didn't have to write a textbook about it. All you had to do is read Atlas Shrugged, and you'd understand her philosophy. Or all you'd have to do is read The Fountainhead, you'd understand her moral philosophy. It was Nathaniel who convinced her to write Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology as a textbook so that she could be taken seriously as a philosopher. And that's what she did. And so I read that. I read everything Peikoff wrote, Leonard Peikoff wrote. I listened to his lectures. At that time, they were on cassette tapes. I just consumed everything.
And let's stop there. Just interject for a
Yeah.
moment there. What was from a far left liberal? I mean, Illusions by Richard Bach. I usually include Jonathan Livingston Seagull in the
Yes.
in a top 5 because
Sure.
I'm just like that's all you need to know about inner motivation and thinking differently and the whole anyway. What happened from reading Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged? I mean, let's take Atlas for a second. It's an allogistic. It's a metaphor to some extent, but it's also a statement of fact of the structure of society to some extent. It is the nature of capitalism to another extent. It is part illustration of what greed looks like, control looks like, but also meaning looks like, and the pursuit of meaning looks like. So, what parts for you? What was the thing that broke down your logical structure of life and kind of superimposed it with a new thinking? What specifically was it that objectivism provided to you in that?
So, as an actor, you learn to sideline your mind. You learn to distrust your rational faculty and to trust your emotions, as Rand would say, as tools of cognition. And you learn that instincts are a real thing that human beings have. And that's what you actually learn a technique to tap into, those instincts, those primal instincts. But the central theme of Atlas Shrugged is the mind's place in society, right? That it's the mind is actually the thing that makes society go. And when the mind goes on strike, society falls. And I never had seen the mind as a primary element in my life. I mean, in Illusions, it's different. It's like it's a conscious first, it's primacy of consciousness idea that you make up reality, as opposed to, well, your mind integrates the facts of reality that are coming in, and then you figure out what's true and what isn't true through a process of reasoning. Because I don't think I can be that guy. If I just believe that wall isn't real, I could walk through it. I really could, like the master in that book. He can play the guitar. Well, he never had a guitar lesson. Well, he's just not in his way. And you practice because you practice in order to give yourself permission to do stuff. All that stuff was very appealing to a 20-something-year-old kid who thought in terms of, well, my mind, I think, therefore I am. My mind makes things real or not. So it was understanding the relevance of the mind in my life and how I needed it to direct my life. And up into that point, all the spiritual work that focused on my emotional life and my past. I was going to therapy from the time I was 16 to try to sort out. So none of that stuff gave me the kind of direction, focus, purpose, and a capacity to overcome my past than understanding what my mind's relationship was to my life and how I could use it to check myself, to understand my emotions, to understand my life. Maybe a deeper actor, a better actor, a more emotional actor, because the values that I embraced not by osmosis, but consciously. I took them in because I know this to be good, and here's why. Blah 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 blah, and I could justify it. And so that's where I think the change happened. But there was also a fundamental moment that freaked me out and pushed me in that direction too. And I'll tell you real fast. I was in church. I was a Christian as well. I had become a born again Christian in my 20s. And I was sitting there in church, and I was already getting cynical about the whole process because of my exposure to Rand. And they were singing a song called "Bathe Me in the Blood of Jesus," and I realized that they meant it literally. They meant it literally, and that cannibalizing a man of virtue was something they literally felt was good. And I was so disgusted, I walked out, and I never looked back since then. And ever since then, it's the mind's primacy in my life, and my director. That's my captain of my ship, that has enabled me to overcome pretty much, I think, everything.
So from this journey, so you walk out of church, you are now a Rand, let's say, subscriber. Where did acting play in this mix? For me, I ended up on stage because that was the place where I was least bullied. So I realized at school that from being, having a suntan and curly hair in the south of England in the 70s is just the least popular look, and it's not a great deal different now. But for me, I walked onto a stage at 5 or 6 years old for an audition in lunchtime, and when I was on stage, not only did I not get beaten up, but also I was able to get this feeling of applause and acceptance, which from being adopted at birth, I had this constant abandonment trauma. So I ended up on stage as an escape mechanism and a validation mechanism. Where did stage arrive in your journey, and why?
I mean, I think that might have been my initial reasoning as well. If I were to sit back and think about it, right? The number of people in an acting class who are broken and who have a very early trauma and abandonment issues and need, I don't want to say promiscuous love, but they certainly need validation on a level that is not like somebody who comes up in from a normal background. And I'm sure that on some level that drove me. Once I found out that I could actually do this, and I'm pretty good at it. But then there was a part of me that wasn't like you, in the sense that I rejected also the praise in a way. I was so twisted up inside that I couldn't even accept the praise, and it made me feel self-conscious and suddenly obligated to meet up to some standard, and that began to get in my way. And philosophy sort of helped me work that out, actually, and figure out, oh, I actually don't have to impress anyone. I'm actually up there for myself. And they say that acting is it's generous, it's a selfless art in a sense, and acting teachers approach it that way. Get off of yourself, get onto the other person. It's not about you, but it is about you. It really is about you. And when you're up there pursuing values selfishly and with a great deal of passion, the rest of the audience just follows you. And so I think eventually I went from, yeah, needing the praise and the validation, even though I rejected it on some level, to trying to find work that expressed my values. And that's super hard because there's not a lot out there that expresses my values,
Mm.
right? You know, you're reading plays from Eugene O'Neill. It was entirely cynical and dark. And I mean, I even went up for the Broadway for the Broadway production of Iceman Cometh, and I actually said to people who were on my side, they wanted me to get this part because they had seen me audition for this ABC series, and they were like, "Oh my God, this guy, he's not an LA actor. He's from New York." I go in there and I'm like, "I hate this fucking play, guys. I can't see myself sitting on stage in this inebriated state and having anybody else tolerate me for 3 hours. It's just endless horror, and I don't want to be that guy." And whereas you find a Tennessee Williams whose characters are twisted and a little bit nutty, but they're striving for life, they're striving for answers, they're striving for something. I
Mm.
could get behind that. But there's just not a lot out there that expressed my values. So John Patrick Shanley. So I would search out playwrights like that who are passionate and whose people are messed up like me, but still trying to win. And I found that very gratifying whenever I could hit the notes in a John Patrick Shanley play or even Shakespeare. Uh, whenever I found it, whenever it sang, whenever it found its zone, it was the most amazing feeling in the world. Now the trick is to not try to keep reproducing that feeling over and over again. Take everything new, but then it's arts for art's sake, right? It becomes its own life, and you just want to experience, that moment for what it is.
So you've, I think that now I can see that there is a thing about the roles you've played. I hadn't considered it until you've just said that. That there seems to not only be something that makes logical sense, there's kind of like a red thread that runs it through it, but also everything that you've done, potentially with the exception of the Treehorn Thug in Big Lebowski, because there's nothing I can see of myself in that. But the most of the roles that you've done, I feel that I can sense a reflection of parts of our humanity, and you're kind of, I don't know whether you even, well, was it intentional? What you bring to a role seems to be you're enabling the person who's watching to see a part of themselves that maybe was yet to be unlocked, or um, I'd never seen that until you've just mentioned it. Has that been intentional? How you've read the things you've read for, or the things you've wanted to get the part for? There was evidently an intentional choice from your side to align it with what you stood for. I hadn't considered that.
I mean, what I try to do, since so much of Hollywood, so much of the Hollywood narratives that come out, as talented and as amazing as they are, don't represent really what I think or feel about life, and they're not my ideal at all. I do something that I think all actors attempt to do. If they're playing the bad guy, which I often have to play somebody who's considered the bad guy in the narrative, I find the virtue. I find, what virtue am I going after? Now, I let the script take care of itself and the story take care of itself, right? I'm going after the virtue inappropriately, as everyone can see, but I'm still going after a virtue. So when I played Paul Bennett, like one character that everybody universally says was an a-hole, which I take as a compliment, I guess. I was a guy trying to reunite my family, trying to get my life back together, trying to reunite with my wife, make my past right, make amends for all the bad things that I'd done. And there's this stranger in our lives now who's suspicious to me, and who is now not only taking my place, but having an influence on my children and breaking up the family even more. So that was the virtue I tried to come at it with. And I'm frustrated at every step by my wife, by
Yeah.
Rita, by Dexter. But everything I try to do that's right is wrong. And, how would anybody feel when you're trying to do the right thing and you're being constantly berated for doing the right thing? Well, you get upset. And you might
Wow.
lose it a little bit. You might drink, because you're so upset and you have no outlet for it. And so I try to find the virtue. If you don't do that, you play a caricature. Now, have you ever noticed that people who are extremely left wing, extremely talented actors cannot play somebody from the right side of the aisle to save their lives?
It's true. It's true, and
Yeah.
and that now also makes sense. I hadn't considered it. I mean, I mean, by the way, you are literally the only person that could ever justify anything that Paul Bennett did in Dexter. But I will allow it because you played. But I think, you're right. It does. Is that the other way round as well? Would people who are the other side of the aisle find it? Is it typical that you tend to stick within a lane that is one side or the other of the aisle? Or is it specifically, would you say, people who are far left of the aisle finding it harder to play the other side than the other way round? Is it interchangeable or one way or the other?
I think the people on the far left have a harder time playing people on the right because the one thing the left does right, uh, this is in total isolation because I think what they believe is utterly wrong. But what they do right is they consider their politics to be extensions of their values and morality. They take
Yes.
morality seriously, right?
Yes.
Whereas the right tries to pretend like there's a distinction between your political life and the values that you hold. And there isn't. There really isn't. So they try to pretend that they could be friends with somebody who thinks that the world should be the complete antithesis of the way they do. And you really can't, not on any deep level, unless you're just friends with them to enjoy. Like we like MMA, so we watch MMA together, but we disagree on everything
Yeah.
else. So you're not really friends.
Yeah.
And so the left takes that shit very seriously. But they also have a cartoon idea of what the right is, and they have a cartoon history of the right,
Hmm.
and sort of a cartoon history of the left, to be honest with you. But they have invested in that cartoon history, and so when it comes time to thinking about thinking the right's thoughts, they do a cartoon version of it. I'll give you an example of it that was done in an interview by Michael Shannon. Now, Michael Shannon is a damn good actor. He played the Iceman. Okay, do you know the Iceman?
Hmm. Yep.
Okay, so the Iceman, for anybody who doesn't know, was a notorious hitman for the mafia.
Hmm.
He was a serial killer on the side, a complete and total psychopath. All right, Michael Shannon played this guy. But when he was asked if he would ever be interested in playing Trump, he said no. And they said, "What?" He said, "Not at all." Why? I don't even want to know what goes on in that guy's mind. Now, I think he's playing to his audience. I think he doesn't want to come out and say, yeah, that would actually be a very interesting challenge. Because
Hmm.
look, I'm a guy who has no political home, but I think Trump and I think Trump is a malignant narcissist. I think there's so much going on there that would be interesting to explore. I mean, here's a guy who comes off like he's a tough guy, and he's got the most fragile ego in the room. There's something going on there that I think any actor or psychiatrist worth their frickin' salt would want to get down to the bottom of. And you hear Michael Shannon, who played a murderer who used to randomly murder people on the streets to test out a gun or a poison, yet he can't play Donald Trump. I mean, that's the level of psychological barrier and trauma that these folks have, so much cognitive dissonance with respect to seeing the other side as human that they simply can't do it.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, and I hadn't considered that side either. So you end up. Yeah, I mean, we're going to skip over your role in your heavy metal band XL. We'll skip over that. I mean, you go into the um,
Thank you.
this is the interviewer's privilege. So so you end up in you walk into into a role into an acting life, and I'm trying to join the dots now between the kind of the late 80s Fatal Beauty, Death Wish, No Holds Barred, nightlife stuff into where things started getting really interesting in the 90s and bigger roles, and you start getting more kind of recognized, and it's less kind of part-time roles, and it's more kind of and then you arrive in the late 90s in Big Lebowski, albeit as a thug, but then that, I mean, bearing in mind you've had a role in possibly one of the greatest cult films of all time, that did that open the route into how you ended up with in Mulholland Drive and The Hunted and Spartan and National Treasure and all this kind. Did that, was that a launch pad? Because in my view, I see anyone who's in the credits of Big Lebowski kind of you arrive into a part of human life that is really meaningful there. So was that a launch pad or not?
It could be. Now back in the mid 80s when I started acting in like about 86, 87, I was I was fortunate and unfortunate at the same time because I got an agent before I knew anything about acting, and I got a job on Fatal Beauty before I knew anything about acting. So I literally went into acting knowing nothing, having never acted before except in a play in fourth grade. And I got kicked off the stage by my fourth grade teacher because I was laughing in the middle of the play. I was actually doing the right thing as an actor, but she pulled me out of the play. So I had no experience whatsoever, and it shows. And then um, I joined this theater company and started to discover what a real approach to acting was. But then, doing something in an acting school and doing something in real life are very different. You know, acting in a perfect environment where you have all the time in the world to prepare and rehearse and play with something and discover it, and then going into the world where there's nothing but results. They're on a shooting schedule. They just need things right now. There's a huge learning curve, at least for me. It doesn't necessarily, it's, of course, everybody has their the time when they evolve into themselves. For me, it took probably 10 years before I started to realize how to compute the stuff I was learning in class and translate it over into the work in the real world. And it was around that time in the mid 90s that it started to happen more and more. Um, and The Big Lebowski might have played a part in further roles, but I also feel like, believe it or not, Dexter did too, because Dexter was one of the first parts that I played that was a bad guy, but a complicated bad guy. And it was around the time when they started writing stuff like that, right? They started not there weren't such black and white villains anymore. We weren't on the A team. There was no more A team 80s stuff. This was like the you sometimes it was hard to distinguish who the good guys and the bad guys were, and especially a show like Dexter, where look, when I first read that script, they wanted me to do a guest starring role in the pilot episode, which I said no. And I read the script and I told my wife, I said, it's the beginning of the end of the world. She said, why? I said, because they're writing a series about a serial killer who's the hero. And I said, how can you lionize a freaking serial killer? They are the most despicable people on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Now, you might ask why I did the part. Given that feeling about it, I also began to look at it from an objectivist perspective. Now, what was my objectivist perspective? Well, yes, he's got this terrible thing that it's inherent in him. It's almost like it's a part of his DNA. But his father taught him a code of values. And what he does is he lives by this code of values. And that's what enables him to restrain this part of himself or direct it in ways that you can't say are they're socially correct, but you can say it's for the good, even though it's outside of our realm of law. He's still channeling this bad thing to a place that most people would say, all right, I respect it. He's killing bad guys. And so the fact that he was using a code of values to direct his behavior, I was like, all right, I can get behind that. I can get behind that. See how I have to I have to really turn things around in a circle to go, okay, that sort of fits with my values. I think I can do it. And then because of that complexity, I think other people started seeing me as, oh, you're not just a bad guy. Maybe you're a guy that we like in Lucifer, where we can feel sympathy for the issue that you're in, and maybe
Yes.
even start rooting for you, even though we're not supposed to.
Yeah, that was the thing with Lucifer is that my I was rooting for you, despite the semi narcissist. Well, no, that's not fair. There were things that stuff you pulled off were sometimes it was cheeky. On one end of the spectrum, it was cheeky, fun stuff that you kind of like. I would have always liked to have done if I could against the bullies in the classroom. Like, so the way I viewed Lucifer was that's how those are the things, the powers that you had in there were things that I wish that I had when I was growing up. And that's why I got into martial arts, because the nearest I could get was martial arts to that. And on the other end of the spectrum, I think the Lucifer character brought a it was, I mean, it was almost role model like in a bizarre way, and I can see what you mean with the Dexter side. I couldn't believe it when Dexter started, and I was like, you can't. I think in the first episode, the cutting up of the bodies and there's blood absolutely everywhere, and they're covered in plastic sheets. And I'm like, you can't make this a dark comedy. I mean, you could show it in maybe in reverence to all the people that may have been, but come on. And I think Supernatural kind of has a similar side where no one could really glorify the devil, but you can if the devil's like that. And it's it's a strange one. It challenges your humanity to some extent.
Yeah, and if you understand the devil's story, especially the way they paint it, I mean, first of all, what makes Supernatural, I think, so iconic and long lasting is in the end, it's a story about family
Hmm.
and loyalty and orphans overcoming, like, because essentially Sam and Dean are orphans, right? Their dad dies, their mom dies in the first episode, for crying out loud. They're left on their own to fend for themselves. And they do it. Their dad is a hunter, and they live this vagabond life, and they're really, really under a great deal of emotional stress. But they wind up being these powerful dudes who will take on God. And so the story itself about a family and abandoned sons and brothers with issues with each other, it translates over into the heavenly realm as well, where one brother is outcast by the others and even beaten down and totally abandoned by his father for disagreeing with him. And so I looked at Lucifer from, I think, an objectivist perspective, which is he's the first rebel against arbitrary authority. And for being that guy, rather than being respected by his father and his father saying, okay, I get what you're saying, he was cast out, and he wanted revenge for that. He wanted justice for that. I have a tattoo on my shoulder that is a symbol for justice. Justice is an extremely important concept to me. And season 5, Lucifer, especially, justice is what drove him. And that's what made him very powerful to me as a character, because he was a big bad, and the stuff he said was funny because it was understated. Everything was understated, but he was the smartest guy in the room. He had a plan, he had a mission, and he was righteous in his mission. And I loved that about him. That changes later on. He becomes sort of a cheeky imp later on.
Yeah.
And in that case, it's like, oh, I like playing, a tantrumy 5-year-old. I can just sort of do what I want,
Yeah.
and that's sort of fun too. So that's what I that's
And
what
s-
I ended up
and
playing over.
so what I now am trying to draw the line to, and we're going to get to the Capitalist Party in a second. I'm drawing a line to what you're filming at the moment, the kind of the untitled murders, which I can't. I mean that I followed that on a constant basis to work out what the heck was going on there, and I don't know whether you're allowed to talk about it or not, but your role, which it seems to be reported that you're playing Curtis Eddie Smith.
Yes.
I mean, this is still at the time of recording. It's yet to be even titled and the release dates and so forth. But do you? This is a story I viewed that as a story of a twisted justice from one side of things, but also a deep corruption on the other side of things. And as it was played out on television, there was in the kind of the documentary side, there was this unveiling of a deeper set of stories. It seems like a very obvious thing at the start. It's very, there seems to be this murder that happened, and then the recordings come out, and then there's this audio thing, and it's like, hold on a minute, and then there's this distance traveled, and then it's like, well, how that, and then there's the police investigation, and it gets darker and darker and darker and darker and darker, and so we've got Jason Clarke and Patricia Arquette, who I love, and all this stuff coming.
Oh,
Coming.
if Jason Clarke is amazing. All of my scenes are with Jason Clarke, and of course I've seen his work before. But to actually get a chance to work with somebody, he works just like I like to work.
Right.
So it was really, really, really fun working with him.
Well, I mean, I always thought you should have been in Oppenheimer playing a role. So the fact that he kind of took arguably he took your role in Oppenheimer, but that's not for another thing. But the when you took that role, so now by the time you read for this and you get the role, the American Capitalist Party is in full swing. It has anyone, this is a bit of a tangential question, but has what you're doing with the Capitalist Party had any impact on the roles that you've been offered? Because you are now indelibly linked to a political viewpoint. So
Yes.
now you can see the tenuous thread I'm making here.
It's not so tenuous. It's a real
Okay.
thread. And now here's the problem, though. One, capitalism has such a bad rap, and everybody has an instinctual reaction to the concept of capitalism. Even though everybody in Hollywood is capitalistic,
Of course.
they hate that about themselves, and I think they hate that about the world, and they think it's not moral. There's another way to do things that's moral. So connecting me to capitalism means I'm just connected to something they don't quite understand but have a vague dislike for.
Mm.
And because I'm not on the right, but sometimes will say things that sound like I'm on the right, some people on the left will presume that I'm a right winger, and because I say things that are socially very, very liberal, even extremely socially liberal, the people on the right think I'm a leftist shill and will attack me too. Now, there's not many people on the right in Hollywood, but I find that those people accept me more than the people on the left. Now, it's very possible that my affiliation and outspokenness about my politics and my moral viewpoint has alienated quite a few people. It's potentially potentially alienated, people who would follow me on Facebook and see me, unfortunately, arguing for Donald Trump, not because I supported him. I never voted for the guy and never would vote for the guy, but they would say such insane things. I'm like, well, that's not actually what happened. Here's what actually happened. Those people probably thought, some of them casting directors, that I supported Donald Trump, which I didn't. I was trying in 2020 or 2016, I was trying to just lower the temperature. Like, you guys are all insane. Here's what's really happening. And I would get vilified and attacked and unfollowed. And since I've, been quite open with my political perspective, there's all kinds of lies and bullshit circulating on the internet about what I think. I'm a homophobe. I'm a transphobe. I'm a racist. I'm a Islamophobe. I'm every kind of phobe and ist that you could come up with. None of it justified. I say, please point to the things that that substantiate your point of view, and they'll drag up something, and I'm like, well, what's wrong with that? Tell me exactly how that what I'd say there justifies your judgment of me. And they can never come up with any answers. And so I'm sure those people have had an effect on, the conventions that I go to or cannot go to. And it's a possibility that a producer could look at my social media feed, not at my it's like my Instagram feed and my Twitter feed are so different. You'd think there are two different people on both.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because they are actually two entirely different contexts. And if you would have to only take one of them to make an opinion that supported a bias. If you looked at both, you would see two halves of a coin that is actually as liberal can be inside the reality of capitalism. That's what I see.
Yes, and unfortunately, what most people might go to is X as this first thing, because there's a lot of conversations that take place there, and they're like, "Ooh, there's a lot of vitriol on this site. There's a lot of controversy. I don't know that I want to get involved in that." And I understand that. I mean, I understand it, but I think it's a total pussy way of working. I really think it's cowardly. And I think that the more you give in to those few voices that are super loud, and they're the ones who are actually the bullies and the liars. They're the ones who
Yes.
actually have the bad karmic wheel turning in their direction, not me. The more you give in to them, the more power they get. And I think it's unfortunate if people look at that feed and they see something that I say and they go, "Ooh, that's spicy." I don't think we want to really deal with that, because if they actually look at who it is I'm talking to, like a supporter of Hamas or some Stalinist who actually is trying to rewrite Stalin's history and impose it in and trying to capture the American middle class with a bunch of bullshit. And I'm confronting them on this, and they get nasty with me, and I get sarcastic with them. It's crazy how that gets turned into, wow, you're just mean. Well, no, I'm being sarcastic with somebody, and they're being mean. I mean, you should see the things they're saying to me. Now, that probably does have an effect on my employment. I wouldn't be surprised. But then I'm in a dilemma. It's like, do I shut up and let the bullies take over the medium, or do I fight the bullies, get employed less, but live with my integrity? Well, I have to live with my integrity, so I
Yes.
think I'll go that way. And
Yeah,
that's what.
I could not agree more. Fundamentally, due to my upbringing being bullied for the most part of my entire childhood, the I see the people who will twist words online, shouting from behind a screen, probably in their mum's basement, as the new version of the bullies in the playground. I have a similar distaste for them. The cyberbullying is as bad as the physical bullying. Sometimes it's actually worse. I'd sometimes prefer to take a punch in the face than death threats via email. I mean,
It's worse. I'd say it's worse because, you know, here's why. Like, I grew up, in the 70s. I'm dating myself, but a lot of the kids that I grew up with, we came from broken homes. We lived in a sort of middle class area, and some of it was well off. Our neighborhood is not so much, but the kids were we were all fucked up, and so we were fighting all the time. Like, bullies, a bully bullied you, you punched him in the face, and and usually it made the guy go away, or you lost the fight and they had more respect for you. Whatever happened, the bully that bullied you in the playground, as much of a jackass as he was, he had more courage than the dude that's sitting behind that keyboard,
yes,
not only talking at you, but organizing an army, sometimes of his own sock accounts and other friends who are also malicious actors against you. And then whenever you respond with anger and rage because you're being maligned, you're being lied about, they're spreading terrible things about you that aren't true, they then take that and then they run with that, and that is there forever. And then they archive it. And then they can post it randomly. A perfect
yep,
example. I was arguing with this person for like an hour. Now that's stupid, but I was arguing with this person for like an hour, and they were just despicable. And I said something to them like, that's absolutely retarded. And this person said, thank you. Thank you for the ableist slur. Now, I had no idea what an ableist slur was. All right. That word was something we used all the time growing up. People called me that. I called them that. I had no idea how it evolved into something socially unacceptable. I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, it was a she, and she said, thank you very much. I'm going to use that now. And that, and first of all, I apologized on social media verbally. I apologized in 2 videos and a podcast. I said, I am like just boomer adjacent, had no idea this thing had become a socially unacceptable thing to say. So I'm very sorry that I said that. I could have used had a better choice of words, and I'm sorry. Multiple apologies, and I vowed I would never use that word again in social media. And still, that thing comes up. You are an ableist. I said, what's the date on that? It's 2017. Find another time that I've said that since then. It doesn't matter. You said it. Oh, so there's no forgiveness in you. A person can't make a mistake with you. I made a mistake, and I admitted it 17 times.
yeah, and has the person who is the person who's accusing you of that never said anything out of context, never in their entire existence, out of the 7 million words they've ever said in their life, has every single word been exactly, completely and utterly woke, like in their entire life, really, seriously.
Never. That's an impossible standard. And what's worse is this. Once people start to see that, oh, social media is sort of an equalizing element here, like equalizing in the worst sense of the term. Like, I can now do something to somebody I perceive to be on a higher social and economic status than me. I can actually ruin their fucking lives. And one of the reasons I got sort of ostracized was because I defended a cast member who was being accused of something, and they were destroyed. They literally destroyed his life. He's now in retirement. He lives in Michigan. He's no longer in the business anymore. I was the only cast member to stick up for him. And they attacked me for it. But I was like, guys, if you have a real criminal issue with this person, all the things you're saying sound ridiculous, but take it to the police, make out a report, and charge the guy formally for it. Right now, you're murdering his reputation on social media, which they in fact did, only to have a year and a half later, the original accuser come out and say she lied about the entire thing. And she only felt a sense of community with people. And that's why she kept lying for as long as she did. But other people, they got that same dopamine rush or whatever the fuck it is.
Yeah.
And they all started. I mean, he would show me a picture of a girl. He's like, this person says I raped her, Mark. I've never been to that town in my life. So like 300 women came on and claimed that he had sexually harassed them. None of them were true.
Yeah, it's there's several musicians, which I shall not name because some of the cases are still going. There's several musicians that I've known over the years that whose career has actually been cancelled due to this. So relatively famous musicians that you may, some people in fact listening or watching will have records of these musicians, and then they don't release albums anymore. And in all of the cases that I'm referring to, it is for cases that were with rumors that were spread that were then actually walked back on by the accuser, but the story is still out there, and that musician can no longer have a record deal. They can no longer release records. Their entire life has been ruined by a complete fabrication and a lie that was then admitted to be a lie by the accuser. But
and
the
then
records,
I'm sorry, that accuser there should be a civil lawsuit brought against that accuser, and that accuser should feel the pain of what they've done, because they have no idea what they do to a person's life.
That's right. And it's from a mental health perspective, this is also bullying. It's the same subject. It's exactly the same point. It's the same
But if
thing.
you fight back, they're able to twist it up and say, you're the bully. I'm sorry, I'm just fighting back because you're lying about me. Am I not supposed to be offended by that?
Yeah.
So it lends itself to you being quiet, not saying anything, let it pass over. And then these people just, I mean, they move on because they lose interest and they move on to hurting somebody else. And that's fine for you, but really not fine for anybody else that they decide to target. And so, I mean, I started a Guardian project for a while. With the idea of the Guardian project was to actually like start a show where we outed these people, like Catfish, where you outed people who became part of these bullying structures and you exposed who they were. And I bet a lot of them are young kids, because I found the worst of them to be young teenagers. But you out them and you shame them. You shame them and let them know you know that what you're doing is evil and wrong.
I would support that with my full force. If there, I mean, as I'm obviously biased toward this for my own personal reasons, but it's equally happened to my kids. My daughter, when she was 14, 15 years old, she ended up stopping using digital devices for a while due to this, because of what happened to her was so bad online that she eventually did what every parent of a teenage daughter would like, and she actually turned off her devices. She was like,
Smart.
"This stuff is toxic," and I was like, "You're right." And so, but anyway, what I want to move on to just in our last section now, and this is we could do a whole hour on this point. And by the way, I will genuinely, if there's anyone or if you're doing anything in this realm and I can do anything to help, I'm with you. I will platform that as much as I can. How does this link then to my final point, which was on the martial arts? Where did martial arts sit in this? Because before we pressed record, you've just been rolling for the last couple of hours, and from someone who retired from this in 2019, but also got into it due to bullying. What was your launch pad into martial arts?
Yeah, my launch pad was my mom sent me to a Shotokan karate class in the local YMCA, and I started in that class, and then it got disbanded, because our neighborhood, Van Nuys at the time, wasn't very well off. So it was just one of those things they did at the Y. And then I started studying Taekwondo under Master Chong Lee. I don't know if you knew who Chong Li was, but he wrote a few books called Dynamic Kicks, and he was an amazing
He's a
guy.
legend, mate. He's the
Oh, good
legend of the scene. Yeah, I mean, good name drop.
legend.
No one's ever name dropped him on one of these things before. Quite right.
And I'm glad you know that. I'm glad you know that because he was phenomenal. And then
Taught me how to kick, actually. I'd say most of my kicking
that
technique.
guy, I mean, I used to watch him kick and it just blew my mind. And a totally traditional, amazing Taekwondo class where he walked through the group with his bamboo sword and straightened you out with the bamboo
Well, I
sword if
heard
your technique was
I
wrong.
never experienced it, and I heard about this. That's a legend that he'd have his stick. We would
Yeah.
talk about it in the UK that this was like that's the way that the traditional methods were, and he
Yeah.
was like, but you experienced that for real, right?
Yes, yes, I did. It was great.
Wow.
It was great. But I was like, I guess 15, 16 at the time, and I could do the full splits between chairs. I could do straight up side kicks. I mean, I was, I was so into it. I don't remember why. I don't know if my mom couldn't afford it anymore or something happened where I could not study it at Chong Li's anymore. And so then later on, I got out of the martial arts and then got back into it in my 20s at the Jet Center, where Benny Akitas used to had his place, and that's when Benny Akitas was still sort of at the top of his game as a kickboxer. And I studied with this guy Shuki Ron, who used to train Pete Sugarfoot Cunningham, and he trained he trained one of the heavyweight champs of the world, and he was he was from originally from Israel, and he studied in Denmark. You know, he studied the Danish guys, so they were like second only to the Thai guys as the phenomenal like Muay Thai guys. And he taught me how to kick so unbelievably hard, and I trained with him for 3 years. And I sparred in the ring, but I never competed. And just because, I mean, literally, he said this to me, and we were walking by Don the Dragon Wilson, who was training. He was shadow boxing in the mirror. He turned around to me and he said, "Mark," I said, "Yeah." He said, "You could beat him." Now he was the champion of the world at the time, and I'm like, I said, Actually, no. There's a reason for that because I've seen him walk through like 150 punches to the face and kicks to the face and still win a fight. I said, I'm not that guy. I'm not the guy that's going to walk through everything that you throw at me and still kick your ass. I said, look, I mean, the sparring is fine. I never liked sparring, even when I got good at it. I never liked it. And that's partly, I think, I think it was partly because, I had a huge bully for a father. So every time I went into contact sports like that, and even when I got good at it, I would feel lots of fear,
Me too.
lots of fear. Okay. Like every time I spar, and then when I went to a transition to boxing, which I did for several years, anytime I didn't feel fear, there was something wrong. Right. Like I would get fucked up. Excuse
Yeah.
my French. When I did feel fear, I did well.
Yeah,
The only
I found that fear to me in kickboxing, as a black belt kickboxer, I'm saying this, that never stopped. It never stopped in any competition, in every single sparring, and everything. I've sparred with the worst. I've sparred with 11-time world champions. I've fought against the world champions. I've fought, and the fear for me was always there. When I stopped having the fear, when I stopped was when I was rolling the Sports Jiu-Jitsu World Championships 2019. I arrived there with my now wife, and we were dating at the time. We'd only been dating for a few weeks, and I invited her to Florida, Miami, Florida, for the World Championships. And I arrived there, and I didn't feel a element of fear, and I got bronze. And the only difference between bronze and gold out of 200 and something competitors, the only difference was that I had checked out before the first day. We were acclimatizing 3 or 4 days. We flew over as the Great British team, acclimatizing 3 days, started fighting, and then we had 3 days fighting. And I didn't feel any fear. It was the only time in my entire life I haven't felt fear, and it was the worst I've ever performed in my life. And I ended up with a bronze medal, which should have been gold.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting because I felt like and then when I got back into Taekwondo and eventually got my rank in Taekwondo and started teaching Taekwondo, I did that because Muay Thai was beating me up so bad, like that I thought I wanted to do something that would I could have longevity in, and that's why I started back with Taekwondo, and then I studied at Jun Chong, and I studied at Jun Chong 3 days a week, and then the other 2 or 3 days I would study privately with a guy named JJ Perry. JJ Perry was a four-time All Army Ranger champion in Taekwondo, and he was also an Olympic alternate. And he had a dojang over in Inglewood, so right in the middle of the hood. And I would go there and I train with him privately, and I train in his class. And even as a two-stripe red belt, which is right below black belt. I mean, even as he had me fighting in the black belt classes when I was a green belt, because of my Muay Thai experience, they put me right into green belt, right? So I went from green. I was fighting in black belt classes when he would organize them, and then as I got higher into two-stripe red belt, even before black belt, he was letting me spar with the Olympic teams. Which, when I used to watch Olympic Taekwondo, I'd be like, these guys are lame. This is like totally lame. But when I actually got in the middle of fighting guys my size, 190 pounds, Olympic Taekwondo guys, they kick so unbelievably hard and they were so fast. It was a trip. And I would like, so I remember when I was testing for my second stripe in red, they put me up against the black belt candidate after all I'd been doing for months was sparring with these crazy, amazing Taekwondo guys. And the guy literally threw a lead leg roundhouse, and I did a spinning back kick under his chin. It was over in like a second, and it was because of those guys. It was like your reflexes got so honed and now I can't believe I did any of the stuff that I was able to do back then, because boxing sort of actually, taking a lot of shots to the head gave me, neural issues and balance issues that I still live with to this day. And so I was like, I've always wanted to do jujitsu. I've always had injuries that have prevented me from doing it. So I went into this when I was doing a show in Pittsburgh. I was like, one day I'm going to go into this stout MMA gym and I'm going to ask him, can I do jujitsu there? And I went in my second season of doing this show, and I'm like, do you guys do old man jujitsu? And the guy there, this wrestler with big old cauliflower ears, was like, I have just the guy for you. And he introduced me to this purple belt. His name is Jared Evans, who started rolling with me. And we just started working for about a month or so, 2 months or so. And then I left, and he showed me sort of the light side of the force. Like, so I was learning pure technique, no strength. That's the way, jujitsu should be done. And then I went into Jean-Jacques Machado, and I'm like, talking to Jean-Jacques, I'm like, do you do old man jujitsu here? He's like, as a matter of fact. And I went in there, and I love the way they taught, because most jujitsu places, they isolate the white belts fight, and it's like the white belts kill each other. You get injured all the time because
Yep.
white belts are spazzy.
Yep.
But here it was like there was encouragement. The white belts always fought the color belts, and the color belts would, of course they'd practice on them and stuff, but then they also taught them, and it became this family like I've never ever experienced before in jiu-jitsu. And Jean-Jacques is so amazing at cultivating that. He's always like, be nice to the white belts, yada yada yada, and so you learn that, hey, to teach is to learn a second time. And so actually once you start graduating, I'm a blue belt right now, and once you graduate up, you start to teach, and you're actually learning at the same time that you're teaching. You're confirming ideas in your own body and mind. And it's since become one of the most cathartic and amazing experiences for me. And do I get nervous? I never got nervous wrestling guys. Like it's always about the punch
That's
or the
right.
kick,
That's
that
right.
stuff. I'm sure I'd get nervous if I was competing, because then you're on your feet and there's adrenaline and somebody's trying to wipe your ass out, and this isn't so much that.
Yeah, sparring in jitsu, I never felt nervous about. I never felt fear in sparring in jits,
Yeah.
rolling around, because there was no direct punches to the head and kicks to the head and stuff. And that I think meant one of the reasons why arriving at the Worlds without nerves was partly because even by then I'd become desensitized to it. But I have to ask, from your perspective, do you find, I mean, an unknown fact about you is that if you weren't an actor, you would be a teacher, specifically a history
Yeah.
teacher. And so
Yeah.
what essentially what is interesting, it's a good end to the conversation, is that this is essentially as a blue belt rolling with white belts, and to be honest, frankly, even potentially, I would imagine in your case, even rolling with the purples, you are to some extent teaching people the whole time. You've been in martial arts probably longer than any of the people that you're rolling with. And we have the credit of saying that in our 50s. So would you say that you're kind of becoming a teacher as a pastime anyway?
I am. I mean, I taught acting for 17 and a half
Right.
years, and I teach it with my wife presently. And the good thing about teaching acting is it's sort of an everything system. It's sort of an everything, all encompassing topic that encompasses, all of humanity. So I think you have to be versed in not just filmmaking and acting, but what philosophy. You have to know something about philosophy. You have to know something about history. You have to have a perspective about that. And then you challenge the student, you challenge the student's premises all the time. And to me, that's the most amazing thing, is when you challenge them and make them think in a way that they've never thought of before, and you see the light go off in their mind, and you know that right there's a felt sense that's happened in them, and they're going to be different from that time forward. That's an amazing feeling to have. And I get that teaching. It's funny though, because sometimes when I warm up in jiu-jitsu, when you're talking about martial arts, I warm up as a boxer, warming my shoulders up. And it's funny, my friends are like, "Oh, you're just trying to scare us now," because I box, and I know it looks like I box because I know how to box. And so they're like, "Oh, look at that. Oh God. Oh shoot." So as you would probably, if you were warming up and you started throwing kicks and punches and stuff and just shadow boxing, people would go, "Hmm. All right, this guy's knows a little bit more than we think." Um, but anyway, that was a total diversion. But yeah, teaching I think is the greatest profession in the world.
Well, I mean, and that's a great full circle, because that's why Ethics TV exists, because I'm hoping that people listen to this and think about things in a more inquisitive way. And it is to some extent the reason why, I mean, I came to you via Michael Liebowitz, who is your co-host in your podcast, and the vice chairman of your capitalist party, and of which you're the chairman. And so he ended our Ethics TV episode, which is the one before this, by saying, or two before this, he said, "You've got to speak to Mark Pellegrino." And he said, "Do you know who Mark Pellegrino is?" I was like, "Yeah, I've seen literally like a dozen of what he's been in. Like, of course I do. Do you know him?" And anyway, so it was cool, because so now we're here. Anyway, I've taken up enough of your time, Mark.
But I do want to say something real quick before you
Yes,
conclude. I wanted to say that John Adams said something about teaching that I agree with 100%. Teaching was the greatest profession because you never know where your influence stops. So you can teach that one person, and that can have reverberations for decades upon decades upon decades. It's really one of the few ways in which you can have immortality. So I wanted to leave with that thought, because I thought it was a brilliant thing for a great founder of our nation to say.
that's an amazing quote to end on, man alive. Okay, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it, man. You've
Thank
been
you.
a brilliant guest. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. And yeah, click on all the links below and find out more about what Mark's up to. And I can't wait to see the next things that you're in on TV and the big screen. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.